Let me know if you're able to see my screen. Are you guys able to see my screen?
Yeah, we can see.
Yes, Ramesh.
Okay. So, mm, in a high level, for a minute, what we discussed so far? What we discussed so far for last week? What we discussed? We discussed like all the core concepts, right? Can someone remind what are all the core concepts we discussed?
Exception handling, checked and unchecked, try catch, finally,
Exceptions.
throw
Like,
versus throws.
that's right.
Mm,
One is exception. Exceptions like checked, unchecked. Excuse me.
um, in the list, like array list and linked lists, collections.
Collections
Um,
of all the classes in
yeah,
collections.
like the set
Interfaces
and
and
map
classes.
concepts.
That's right. Um, and what else? Control statements and decision making statements.
Yes, and like hash maps and versus the tree maps.
Those all comes under collections, right?
Uh, yeah,
What about others? No one is speaking, only Venkat. What are the control statements we discussed? What are all the control statements we discussed?
Uh, if else,
Mhm.
uh, so like switch
Yes. And
and loops like for loop.
decision making statements.
Yeah, decision making statements.
Okay.
break statement also, like break, continue.
Break.
Yeah, those all are part of decision making statements. Like I mean, control statements. You're going to
Mm,
break. And what else? What finally block does? Tejasvi, what do finally block does?
Finally, block implements a certain task or any uh, statements mentioned inside it
Mhm.
without even or if even or when even if try catch block throws an error or not.
That's right. Meaning, if your program has an exception or if your program doesn't have an exception, I don't worry about that. The finally block is going to execute at any cost.
Execute. Yeah.
Okay. And how the data is being stored in tree map, Shashank P. How the data is being stored in tree map.
Like the like it stores like key values.
Uh-huh.
Uh,
Oh, that's right. In all your map interface, the data is going to be stored in key value. But what is more specific in tree map? Shashank Gaur, how you can decide it's a tree map? How you can validate and say, okay, this tree map is working as expected. Come on, guys, speak up. Okay,
It stores in sorted order.
that's right. Natural sorting order, right?
Yeah.
It is going to check your hash code and equals to value, and your tree map is having a flexibility of storing your data in an natural sorting order, however you process the data. Okay. Uh, and what is the difference between your for loop of simple and for each loop? Srijan, how for loop works and how for each loop works? What is the major difference? Why do we require both of those? Any idea? First, how for loop works? What is the syntax for it? How you define it? So you will be having initializer, increment, decrement. Before increment, decrement, first you are initializing, then condition check and increment and decrement, right? Am I right? That is a standard for loop. And if you go to for each loop, you are not initializing, you are not doing increment decrement. So you are trying to get a list of data or whatever the data you have, like set or whatever. So you are going to iterate through it, iterating, get each individual object from a list or a set or a map, um, just based on that data, whatever exists in there. So just define for loop and process data type or object of a single, and use your list or a set to it on your right hand side, right? In between there is a colon. So that is where more your for each comes into the picture, right? Am I right, guys? Okay. So today what we are going to do is, uh, today we are going to discuss more about Spring Boot application structure. We're not more detailing about Spring Boot application, how exactly it works, all those things. First, let's create a structure, then we will discuss on how it works. Okay. So Spring Boot application. In one of our Spring Boot application only, we have one thing pending here. We have seen files, but we haven't read and write some data into the files. We'll see files, and we'll also see comparable and comparator interfaces. Comparable and comparator interface. Or what is the other thing? Anything to be, oh, threading. Oh, we haven't discussed about multi-threading, right? Multi-threading. That's very important concept. Yeah, these three concepts we will discuss in our Spring Boot application along with the same thing. Okay. Now, what do you mean by do you guys know, right? Like how you are going to create your application? What are the different frameworks we do have in Java? Do you guys remember what are the different frameworks we have in Java to develop any of your application? Are you guys aware? What are the different frameworks we do have to create your application? Framework. Guys, come on, speak up. Yes or no?
Oh yeah, like you mean like Spring Framework
That's right. Like, what is our current architecture? We created
or
a UPS architecture, right? What is this current architecture? How we created that application?
by Spring?
Spring initializer, right? So
Yeah,
what is this application framework?
Spring Boot,
Spring Boot, that's right. So what is the other framework we also have? Spring MVC. Are we discussed about this? Yes or no? If no, I will explain. If yes, I need some inputs from you. Spring Boot application. So how your Spring Boot application works? What is the difference between your Spring Boot application or Spring MVC application? Do you guys know that? In general, not in detail, in a high level. Okay, so Spring Boot application is more used to develop REST API. Develop your uh, RESTful applications. RESTful application. It might be either in a JSON format. The data might be in JSON or XML formats. Okay. So data might be, and your Spring Boot is an independent application. Independent application, and you can have multiple services. You can multiple services communicate each other via REST API, or you can use a Kafka. I mean, either synchronous or asynchronous way. Multiple services can communicate each other via synchronization process or async. So synchronization is your multi-threading. Multi-threading is a sync process. Asynchronization is your Kafka. Okay. So you are developing REST API application. Data might be JSON or Excel format, and this is an Spring Boot is an independent application. Independent is nothing but only backend service. We will be having only backend service. Okay. Your front end is a separate component, right? And multiple services communicate each other via synchronized or asynchronous process, and it has inbuilt database. You can use H2, and you also have a test component built in, and you also have application server, default server, Tomcat server. Okay, these are all the advantages of what you have in your Spring Boot application in a high level. There are many more, but in a high level, you are developing your REST API. This is more used for developing REST application, and your application might be in a JSON or XML format. And this is an independent application. We will be having only backend service. We don't have a front end component in your Spring Boot application. Multiple services can communicate. Consider here I have these many services: AWS, Amex, API Gateway. All these are multiple services, and it has the inbuilt database. You can add in your pom.xml h2 database, and you also have test components. So if you see source main Java and source main test, source main resources and source main source test Java, source main Java. Okay, in test you can create a test component. You can use JUnit test cases with along with a Mockito framework and write it. And it also has a built-in Tomcat server. So if you see here application.properties inside your resources, application.properties. So your Spring application name is UPS. You can define your Tomcat server property here. Application.server port 8080. Tomcat always runs on a port 8080. Okay, so that is where your Spring Boot is more regularly used by most of the developers, where your application is considered as a microservice based architecture. And if you are consider in our UPS, we are working on one of the project, right? UPS. So we are working on multiple components in a same project. We can split that multiple components into multiple projects like user register, user service, and we also have a lot of services, right? So we can create user service, admin service, customer service, fraud service, inventory service, notification service, all those are multiple services. Every service has its own feature. All services will communicate via synchronized or asynchronous communication. So everything together we would consider as a single UPS application. Is it good? Any questions? Let us try to have what all the packages, how the structure will be inside your Spring Boot and your Spring MVC. And before I go in structure in Spring MVC, this is Spring MVC is a model view controller application. You will be having a model view and controller. So model is nothing but all your components. So model is nothing but your components in your application. View is nothing but your UI layer. UI layer. Controller is nothing but your backend logic. Backend logic. So what is the major difference in between your Spring Boot application and Spring MVC application, Ramesh? So the view layer is the additional layer where you have in your UI component. I mean, you also have a web component. You are adding web component in your Spring MVC application, and there is no built-in application server. So if you are working with your Spring MVC application, you have to install Tomcat in your local. You have to download Tomcat and you have to install like search projects, run. Where is view? Go to got perspective. There will be a perspective. Open Windows, not appearance. Yeah, show view. Uh, servers. Okay, everything is here. Let me add this also. Oops. Okay, servers. So if you see Apache Tomcat 9 is what I installed. So if you see, I have one of my project here, Spring MVC. In this Spring MVC application, you will be having a UI component. Let me try to open this. So in my Spring MVC component, so there will be a difference in the project architecture. So you will be having source main Java and resources, but inside source main, you will be having a package. I mean, you will be having a folder called web app. Inside web app, you will be having web.inf. So inside web.inf, you will be having JSP pages. You will be having a web.xml also here. So your Spring MVC application is having a default web.xml, the configuration file. So how we are going to write your pom.xml? In the same way, you will be having a web.xml. We will be having both pom.xml file library and web.xml to define your dispatch servlet. In Spring MVC concept, there is a concept called dispatch servlet. Your dispatch servlet is more it will say like how the process is being validated, like how the bean is initializing. So how your beans are initializing in your Spring Boot application, you are using auto wire, those kind of things, right? We haven't got jump in there like again. So in Spring Boot, all the communication between classes will be happened via uh, annotations. Okay, there are multiple annotations like I'll tell you here. Everything is via dispatch servlet and inversion of control. So all you have to define in a way of a dispatch servlet and you will be having a inversion of a control here, the bean, inversion of control over the bean. Okay, consider these are few of the high level example, I mean high level differences between your Spring MVC application and Spring Boot application, and how your application project structure will contains is like, as I told you, you will be having your model view controller in Spring MVC and Spring Boot both, but in Spring MVC you will be having a one extra component called web app. Your web app is more working in a dispatch servlet inversion of a control, how you are defining your beans. Everything has to be manually defined. But in your Spring Boot, we are not manually defining the beans. So the Spring itself manages the beans. The life cycle of the bean is being managed by your Spring. Spring initializer is going to be taken care. When to initialize, when to close, when to terminate. All those things are taken care by your Spring initializer. How your controller is communicating with service, how your service is communicating with your repository. Everything is taken care by your Spring initializer. So your Spring component is going to be taken care when the bean can be communicated. Okay, and in a project structure level, you will be having few packages called, we already know what are the different packages we have. In those packages, what are the different annotations we need to create? Let me show you. So what is the first package we need is a model package, right? What are the classes contained inside a model? What are the classes contained inside a model, guys? What classes contain inside a model? Model or entity or POJO. POJO is like plain old Java object. So what are the classes contains inside this model package? What classes?
Like uh, preliminary class,
Like an example? Okay, I agree. Preliminary classes. Like what are the examples?
like user.java.
That's right. That's a simple one, right? So why others are not speaking? Is something miracle going on here? No, right? We created all the packages. We created classes, right? What are the different packages we created? What are the different packages we created? Where is my video here? Can you guys pick up? I don't see my who all are here. Oh my goodness. That's hiding somewhere. Can you speak up, guys? Tejasvi,
Yeah.
what are the different packages we do have?
Web controller, we have model, service, repository.
That's right, right? Controller, service,
Repository.
repository,
Util package for helping the classes and the test class
util
in it.
package. That's right. So what all we done so far? We created in a model. We created in a model package. Consider, let's take one of the example. We created a model class user. So user.java, and what does model contains? A data members associated to the user, right? Am I right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Data members associated to the class. No business logic, just members. Okay. And it also has your getter and setter method, your constructor. Am I right? Am I right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Getter and setter, your two string methods, and your constructors. Okay. All are part of your model class. Okay. And what about controller? So your controller, so we haven't seen so far what all the data is there in controller, right? But we have seen in service. What is there in service? You will be having a business logic, right? So how we segregated our business logic? We created an interface. What interface and what class we are going to create in our service? In service, we are going to create a user service as an interface, right? And you have user service IMPL as a class. Am I right? So in user service, what are you trying to write? Abstract methods. Am I right? Am I right, guys? Abstract methods.
Yeah, abstracting.
Abstract methods, like if you are processing CRUD operations, all the abstract methods, no implementations. Am I right? And what about
Yes.
user service IMPL? This implement your interface. Implements user interface and write business logic. Am I right? Am I right? And what contains inside controller is like now the REST endpoints. The REST endpoints to process the URL mappings. So what are some of the REST endpoints? Like what are some of the HTTP verbs? HTTP verbs we call as an HTTP verbs. What are few of those? So one is initially you have to save the data. First you have to save the data using post method. Okay. Then you have to get the data and then you can update the data
Update the data,
and you will delete the data.
delete the data.
These are hands-on what we do. Get, put, post and delete. We also do patch sometimes.
Update partial data.
Partial update. Okay. So that is what all the HTTP verbs we do in your controller. And the controller receives the data from URL and parse it in general, parse it, validate it, and send it back to service layer to validate the business logic. Okay. Does it make sense? Now, once you have the data, once you received your data, once your controller is tried getting your data, now it is going to which package? So let me write, one is your model, two is your controller. Those are the packages. Three is your service and four is your repository and five is your utils and six you will maintain separate package for exceptions. Okay. And what is there in your repository? Service, you guys know. Now controller sends the data to service. Service is having your service interface, abstract method, implementation, your business logic, and you're trying to write your data. So that is where all your data is being processed via service. Now what repository does? Saves repository. Now service sends the data to repository. Okay. Once the data is processed, sending the data to repository layer. Okay. Do you guys agree? Sending the data to repository
Yeah.
layer to
Like it saves or
save in database.
update.
To save in database. So now what contains in repository, Ramesh? Repository contains your JPA, Java persistence, meaning what exactly how you are saving your data in your database. All your operations like save operations, like get operations, like find by ID, find by ID. So your queries, JPA is nothing but your SQL queries. SQL queries are there in your repository, and your repository is interface again. It's an interface where it is going to extends your JPA repository. Your interface is going to extends a class called your JPA repository. JPA repository to perform CRUD functions via SQL queries. Okay. You can also write some custom SQL queries, or you can use the predefined methods. Okay, but you have to create your interface and you have to extend it. Okay, now what are you trying to write in your util packages? Any other constants and your any other extra classes, like if you have enums, if you have a constants, if you have a specific file related things, like unique classes which are not related to these components, and any component which is used in all these components, like any class which is used in all these components kind of thing, you are going to define in util. Except in exceptions, you are going to write your custom exceptions. Custom exceptions for your classes. Okay, everything is defined in your, like you will be having a global exception class, you will be having user not found exception, depends on whatever the transactions you are writing, you are creating a separate class. So that is where you are going to handle it in your custom exceptions on your business service logic, right? Okay, now once you have these exceptions, now what are all the annotations used in Spring Boot? Spring Boot application. What are all the annotations used in Spring Boot applications? Now we know now what are all the packages we are going to create in Spring Boot applications. So we have controller, exception, model, repository, service, util, right? But we 100% not 100% we haven't wrote how the data is being flowing from one class to one class. We are trying to do it right now. But before we do that, we need to add your built-in database H2, and we need to add a Spring Data JPA library, and then we do that. But before we go in there, we need to know what are the different annotations used in a Spring Boot. So in a model class, in a model package, what are the annotations used in a model package? So we are going to use at the rate entity. Okay, entity is like it says it's a database object. Okay, and you are going to use at the rate your Lambok APIs. Uh, we use at the rate entity, we use at the rate table, meaning your database table name, how you want to store in your database table. So use entity table, and for this you are using getter, setter, and all those annotations. Your Lambok, there is a library called Lambok API library. I mean, you can say it's just Lambok library, not an API library. Lambok library for your getter, setter, constructor, and all those. So you are not going to create a getter method, setter method, and all those. You are going to use at the rate getter annotation, and at the rate setter. And if you don't want at the rate getter setter, you can define only data. It is a combination of getter setter, but in some classes I don't want to specify setter methods. To make it more private, I use only getter method. So that is where you can use separate annotations. And you also have at the rate constructor, and at the rate all arguments constructor, okay. You have these kind of annotations in your entity, and in your model class, as you specifies entity is a package. For entity or a table, you will be having, if you consider your application is working on your database is having a primary key, right? So consider if you have a database table, the table needs to have your primary key. So my primary key here is at the rate ID. So your ID can be a type of a long. Most of the time we use a type long for your ID. Okay, at the rate ID is an annotation that will specifies your data is a primary key, and you can specify how you want to generate that value. You want to use incremental value starting from 1, or you want to generate some sequence. So that is also having a separate annotation. At the rate generated value, you have to use that specific sequence. Generated value, everything is annotation based. So how these annotations will be getting detected, Ramesh? Okay, we will create these annotations, but how it will detect on your application? So annotations will be detected by libraries. After adding libraries in your pom.xml. Okay, so for two strings and all this, you need to add a Lambok library in your pom.xml. And for your entity table, you need to add Spring Data JPA, Spring Data JPA library. Okay, Spring Data JPA library. And for controller and everything, we already have a Spring Boot parent. Spring Boot parent is a library where it will get your controller and all those things. Okay. Now, so yeah, these are all the annotations part of your model class. In controller, what all the annotations we are having? In controller, what are the different annotations we have? We have at the rate REST controller. This is a REST. In your Spring Boot applications, we develop only REST API, right? So that is where it contains only at the rate REST controller and at the rate put mapping, get mapping, post mapping, delete mapping. Put mapping, all your CURD operations. Put mapping, post mapping, get mapping, delete mapping, and at the rate request body, response body. You will be having at the rate request body and at the rate response body to perform your REST API applications. Okay, at the rate REST API. And to get your REST controller and all these annotations, you need to have a pom.xml called Spring Web. Spring Web is a library where it will pull all your controllers and those things. Okay, Spring Web for controller and your service. Okay. What are we discussing? Yeah, request body, response body. And to read each individual parameter from URL, you are using at the rate path param. Path param. Or you can use at the rate come on, what was that? Sorry. You can use path variable or path param. So there is a multiple differences between your path variable and path param. I'll show you, but those are the annotations part of your request body, your request body, getting your path variable or path param. So like what exactly we are doing in our controller, Ramesh? So consider when you are trying to access your Google, right? HTTPS colon google.com/ create user. Okay, consider this is an URL while you're trying to sign up. Okay, let me show you that. So if you go in Google, okay, sign in. Okay, uh, create an account instead of sign in. Let's say, or else log into some. Let's do this. Okay, sign into Gmail. If you see sign into Gmail, the URLs is what I'm more focusing about. Come on. Or else, what I can show you guys. Okay, let's see this one. So if you see, uh, this is one of an application. Okay, focus on URL. Okay, don't forget about the content in here. Focus on URL. So this is an application. Okay, so Greeks.java is an application. So after Java, what is the application it is saying? Spring MVC create registration form using the library. This is a URL mapping. So how we are going to read this URL? So consider this is a URL. So you want to read that URL. So when someone trigger this application, how this data is been populating? This is all your JSP page or HTML page, right? So how this data is been populating? So you added this data into the page, right? So you added the data into the page, but what is pulling the data? How the flow will happen? Once a user triggers this request, where it goes internally. Once user trigger this request, where it goes internally. It goes into your dispatch servlet. Your dispatch servlet will define what is this URL, where it is coming from, where to send it. Okay, that decides and send it to your controller. Your controller will see, okay, as this is a get call, do I have a get mapping for this URL? So it will see this one. So Spring MVC registration form using form tag library is the URL. And for this URL, you're trying to have a get mapping. Get mapping. So once you have that get mapping, you will create a get method for that and give what should be happen inside that git method. So get the JSP page or try to go to service logic and try to read, send only HTML content in there. So everything has to be URL mapping. So how your URL is being processing via REST API. Okay, this is a kind of Spring MVC application. Ignore about that. But how in general application works is every application will work via URL mapping. That URL has to be get via get mapping, post mapping, or something. And if you have any registration page, you will be having a button. So once you click on that button, then it will save your data. That is a post call. Okay, so there are multiple calls. Okay, let's try to see all the things in our project too and try to have an end-to-end application flow. We have a REST controller, put mapping, post mapping, get mapping, request body, response body, all these things, right? And there is a one common annotation in all of your classes is at the rate auto-add annotation to create object for classes, to create object of classes to communicate in between those methods. Why we require a classes? Why we require an object for class? Why we require an object for a class? How do we access your data members of that specific class? How do you access?
The class object.
By creating an object, right? So how do you create an object? So far, how are we creating an object? Venkat, how are we creating an object right now? Venkat, Srujan, Shashank P. How are we creating an object right now? Current, so far. How are we creating? By calling a class reference name equals to new object, right? Using a new keyword, we are creating an object. Am I right, guys?
Yeah, like giving the object reference in the class, like creates the object in the memory.
Correct, right? Like this. This is where you create an object, right? So now, in your architecture, like your Spring Boot or Spring MVC, you won't use that. You use an annotation based approach to create an objects. You use at the rate
Yes.
auto to create an object, and the auto is going to specify how the life cycle of your object, when to initiate, when to process, when to destroy. Okay, it is automatically happening via your annotation. Okay, now we discussed more about controller. Now what are the annotations there in your service package? In service we use lot of annotations, but for now @service is good enough. @service is an annotation that will consider as your bean meaning it will consider this as a service component, and Spring Initializer will initiate a bean for it, and you can have service implementation, service interface, and try to communicate the data. You are not going to create an object and saying this is a service. And for repository, you are using an annotation called repository @repository. There are many more annotations in service for your data JPA transactions, persistence APIs, I will tell you. But for now, @service is good enough. And in your repository, you are using @repository annotations, and you are using @query annotation. There are multiple annotations you are using in your repository also. But for us to know, @repository is a single annotation that is good for right now. Okay. Now let us see all these libraries are added in our pom.xml or not. What all the libraries we need to add in our pom.xml to make your application? These application libraries, right? Lambok, Spring Data, JPA, Spring Boot Parent, and Spring Web. Let's see what all the annotations we have in our pom.xml. So if I open my pom.xml, dependencies, let me check in my dependencies instead of going in there. I have Spring Boot Data JPA, I have Spring Starter Web, and I have Lambok. Everything is added. That's good. And we also added MySQL connector. We also added H2 database. Okay. And you added already Spring Starter Web. Your Starter Web is going to pull your default Tomcat server. For Tomcat, you are not going to add any separate server. Okay. Is this clear, guys, in your pom.xml dependencies? Is it clear?
Yeah, yeah, Ramesh.
Why are we using Spring Boot DevTools? I explained initial time when we create a project. Why do we require DevTools? Okay, I'll ask you a question again. Now, let us create all the annotations for the classes and see how the application flow is happening. Let us go in first model, go in user model. So in user model, this is a class. Inside our class, on top of a class, we are going to define an annotations. What is annotations? I said @entity Jakarta persistence API @entity and @table, right? Table name, you can specify the name of the table. Name equals to, I want to specify user. Okay, just user. It has to be in double quotes. Okay, entity table. And we also added Lambok. Let us see. I got a getter method and setter annotation. Where those are coming from? If you see, those are coming from which library? Lambok library. This is coming from which library? Jakarta persistence API. That means your data JPA. Okay, we got @getter, @setter, all arguments constructor. Right? We create all arguments constructor and no arguments constructors, right? We create those methods. Am I right, guys? This is a constructor, right? So instead of creating these methods, just defining these annotations will be good enough. Okay. And your, what is another annotations? ID, primary key, right? What is the primary key here? Your user ID is a primary key. So @ID that comes from your Jakarta API, @ID. Okay. And at the rate uh, generated value, I'm making this as at the rate generated value strategy equals to generation type dot, make it as an auto. Okay, so I'm making this as an auto increment my generation strategy. So if you see generation strategy, what is this? The generation strategy of auto, this is an enum. We haven't seen this enum. Oh god. If you see, this is an enums. Let me try to open this generation type. Declaration. So if you see what is this is not a class, this is not an interface, this is an enum. Enums we specifically use for a constants kind of things. Unique identifiers can be defined in your enums. So if you see generation type, what are the generation types? I have a table, sequence, identity, UUID, auto. I only have these things. So those are kind of a unique values. Those doesn't have your data types, return values, or those are not methods. You have some variables. You want to consider those as in unique types. That is where. So consider you're purchasing an order. Okay, you're purchasing an order of your what would I say? Uh, you're purchasing your footwear, so you'll be having a different sizes, right? When it consider on footwear, it will be a different sizes. So you will be having like general terminology for your sizes, like you can have a regular size, you can have a medium size, large size, that kind of sizes. Okay, those are all a unique values that doesn't change. Am I right? Does the size value change? You will be adding a new size, but the size value doesn't change. Meaning, if you consider these are the constant sizes for your product, so that is where it has to be defined inside enums, and enums are more defining for your strategy, considering those are a kind of a one type of constants. Does it make sense when to use enums? So you can also create enums in your classes in your util package and have a unique things added into that. So your credit card number, okay, those kind of things can be added as part of your enums. So here I'm saying this is an auto. That means my strategy is going to be generated in an automatic way. So first it is going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 like that. Okay, these are all the annotations for my entity. Okay, now let's go in controller. Let's go in controller, user controller, right? So now what are the annotations we are going to use for controller? REST controller annotations. This is coming from which library? Spring framework.web. We added that web library in our pom.xml, right? Am I right, guys? We added this web, starter web. From that, this REST controller is coming. REST controller. And you have a request mapping. Request mapping annotation. Request mapping is nothing but your URL starts with or your URL contains. So http://www.ups.com/user. So user, then I have to create a methods here like your where is my service implementation? Customer service IMPL. Let me use customer service and create all these methods with the return types in my controller. Okay. These are not abstract classes. This is a method. Okay, get user, it should return the data. Now it has to return a user value. Return user data. Okay, in here create an object for the user. Delete user. Here we need to get return a list of data. But on top of these things, what are we trying to do now? Adding a user, right? At the rate post mapping. At the rate post mapping. And here this is what? At the rate request body. Am I right? You need to read the data from there. It's going to be your request body. Request body user. Okay. And you need to add update user. It's going to be put mapping. It's going to be put mapping. And get user. It's going to be at the rate get mapping. Okay. And delete user. It's going to be at the rate delete mapping. Okay. We are going to say, process everything, but first try to understand this one. Get mapping. This is also at the rate get mapping. At the rate get mapping for getting your list of data, not exchange, get mapping. there are many more annotations we have to use inside a method, and we have to write your URL mapping. So your post mapping, you are saying post mapping like create user, create user. Okay. Now for your put mapping, you have to use these all are URL mappings. Inside your annotations, we are saying update user. You have to send user object to this update user, and get mapping, get your data by get user by role. You have to send a role here. So this role has to be dynamic value. Okay. Slash, you have to put in your flower brackets, the role. Then this is going to read by a path variable. So it has to be read before path variable or path param. Path variable get string of role. Okay. Yeah, so already we are running out of time. Tomorrow we will discuss more about all these things. So try to go through what are the different things we have seen so far. How your Spring Boot application work, how Spring MVC application work, and try to create your annotations on your entity classes. And let us try to complete end-to-end flow tomorrow with a Spring Boot framework. Okay, does it make sense? So your assignment for today is to go through the concept and try to add your entity class and try to run the application. Add annotations and try to run your application. Do you guys know how to run your application? So open your UPS controller and try to right click and run on your application. Run as a Java application. That will gives you what all the errors exist in there. If there is no error, that is good. If there is an error, it will give you what is an error. Okay, you have to see this. So if you see, so this is where you're starting your application right now, Spring Boot application. So dev tools, your libraries will come into the picture. We have an error here. There is a bean definition error. So we are trying to write your controller things, right? So we are completely not done yet, but let's see. And it is also saying what it is saying again, your JDBC connection error. You not defined your connections for your JDBC is what it is saying. You have to connect it to database, H2 database, Hibernate error. Yeah, we will resolve these errors tomorrow, but try to work on this. Okay. Does it make sense, guys? You guys know what exactly your assignment is for tomorrow? Is that clear?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, then.
yes.
Yeah, so try to work on that. Try to read the concept and come up. I will ask few questions tomorrow. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining.